Among the countless files of unexplained phenomena, some stories stand out, not because of blurry photos or second-hand accounts, but because of the evidence left behind. Welcome to Lady E's Dark Tales. I'm Mr. Gray, and our story goes back to a sterile, empty apartment in Kyoto, Japan, where a series of microcassette tapes were discovered. They were the audio diary of a brilliant academic, Dr. Jolene Richter. But they became something else entirely. These tapes don't just tell a story, they document a hunt. On October 12th, Dr. Jolene Richter, a cultural anthropologist, arrived in Kyoto. She was a woman of science, a professional observer who dealt in facts, not folklore. Her grant proposal was titled, "The Commodification of the Uncanny." She was there to study how modern capitalism defangs ancient myths, turning terrifying spirits into cute, marketable mascots. Her subject, the Kitsune. In old stories, these Japanese fox spirits were powerful, dangerous beings, tricksters, seducers, and predators. Now they were adorable characters on keychains. Jolene set up in a clean, sterile apartment in the Higashiyama district. It was a neutral space, a laboratory for her research. Her plan was to start at a small, out-of-the-way shrine rumored to be haunted, the perfect place to observe where genuine belief ended and manufactured myth began. She was confident, rigorous, and completely in control. 2 days later, the first crack appeared. Jolene was a creature of habit, her research materials organized with obsessive precision. She stepped out for coffee and returned to find her entire system in disarray. Papers were reshuffled, notes buried, annoying but explainable. But then there was the pen. Her favorite fountain pen was gone. After an hour of tearing the apartment apart, she found it placed perfectly in the center of her pillow. The logical explanation? Jet lag. Exhaustion can play tricks on memory. It's the simplest answer, the one a rational mind would accept. Jolene chalked it up to her own mind being out of sync. A simple human error. Case closed. But some errors feel less like mistakes and more like messages. On October 17th, Jolene visited the small shrine. It was tended by a single elderly woman. They spoke for hours. But when Jolene pressed about the darker side of Kitsune folklore, the tricksters that feed on life force, the keeper would simply smile. It was a blank, unnerving smile, and her eyes held an amber, predatory glint. But that wasn't the impossible part. Jolene took a taxi back to her apartment, a 30-minute drive across the city. As she paid the driver, she looked across the street. The shrine keeper was standing there, watching her. Same kimono, same hair, same placid smile. The woman held her gaze for a single chilling second before turning and vanishing into an alley. Jet lag couldn't explain this. Coincidence? The odds were astronomical. Jolene was a cultural anthropologist, trained to analyze belief systems from the outside. But for the first time, she felt the terrifying sensation of a belief system analyzing her. 4 nights later, a storm woke her at 3 a.m. The next morning, she found prints on her floor. They were clear in the thin layer of grime on the cheap linoleum, leading from the locked window directly to the foot of her bed. They weren't human. They were small canine paw prints, like a fox. She lived on the 3rd floor. The window had been locked. She checked it 3 times every night. It was still locked that morning. She took pictures, but they showed nothing but muddy smudges, proof to no one but herself. Logic began to fail. A prank. How? A faulty lock. She yanked on it. It was solid. Her mind, the mind of a trained observer, was scrambling for purchase, but the rock was crumbling. The feeling of being watched was no longer a feeling. It was a certainty. The apartment wasn't empty anymore. By October 24th, the keeper was everywhere. Jolene would see her at the market, then hours later on a park bench, several districts away. Each time, the old woman's eyes would find her instantly, followed by that smile. It wasn't a smile of greeting, it was the baring of teeth. This had to be an intimidation campaign, Jolene reasoned. Someone offended by her research, a grounded, human theory. But alone in her sterile apartment, the theory dissolved. She thought of the folklore. Kitsune are masters of illusion. They attach themselves to people, driven by curiosity or pure malice. They delight in methodically dismantling a person's sanity. Jolene clung to a psychological phenomenon known as academic priming. The idea that by immersing herself in fox spirit lore, she was now projecting their traits onto a series of bizarre but unrelated coincidences. It had to be that. Because the alternative was that the subject of her research was now actively studying her. 2 days later, the attack became surgical. Jolene's laptop was wiped clean. Months of research, notes, her entire dissertation, gone. Her phone wouldn't turn on. The landline was dead. The Wi-Fi was out. She was completely cut off. This wasn't a prank or a coincidence. This was tactical. It was isolation, a classic psychological warfare technique used to heighten distress and break the target. Every rational defense Jolene had built was systematically stripped away. Exhaustion, coincidence, pranks, and now deliberate sabotage. Every excuse was neatly, cruelly disproven. An intelligence was behind this. A playful, sadistic intelligence that wasn't just trying to scare her. It was peeling her apart, layer by layer, and it was working. On October 27th, she tried to walk to the police. She just needed to say the words out loud to another human being. She didn't get 3 blocks. A high-pitched, girlish giggle sounded right in her ear. She spun around. The street was empty, but the air grew thick, smelling of ozone and something wild, something musky and animal that shouldn't exist in a city street. She ran. She ran back to the apartment, the only place she felt she could control, and locked the door. But there was no control. It was toying with her, enjoying it. This wasn't a haunting, it was a hunt. And the roles had reversed. The hunter had become the prey. The next day, October 28th, it happened. Jolene stood by her window, staring into the alley below. The shrine keeper was there, looking right up at her. The woman smiled, and the air around her began to shimmer like heat off summer pavement. Her form wavered, distorted, and for a gut-wrenching second, she wasn't a person. Behind her, shadows writhed and unfurled from her body. They were long, like plumes of smoke, like appendages, like tails. Jolene counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The stories weren't metaphors. They weren't cultural artifacts. They were field guides. The Kitsune was real, and it knew she could see it. The game was over. That night, a chilling calm fell over Jolene. She read her old printed research, the academic language now a grim joke. She'd used words like liminal trickster archetype, symbolic inversion. She was trying to describe a tornado by analyzing a weather vane. The old texts were much clearer. They say a kitsune can live for 1,000 years. They say the most powerful ones, the Kyubi no Kitsune, don't feed on flesh, but on spirit, on life force. They savor the intellectual and emotional collapse of their prey. Jolene's skepticism, her pride, her stubborn refusal to believe, it wasn't an obstacle. It was a delicacy, a feast. The entity hadn't just been scaring her. It had been feeding on her sanity for weeks. Now it was hungry for the main course. The final tape is undated. The audio quality is distorted, crackling with interference. In the background, a faint scratching can be heard. Rhythmic, deliberate, like something testing the surface of the door. Jolene's voice is a raw whisper, barely audible over her own ragged breathing. She says they will find the tapes, that they will say she lost her mind. The scratching gets louder, closer, claws on a wooden door, 4 distinct points dragging down the wood in slow, patient strokes. She whispers that you should listen to the scratching, that it's coming in, and her voice cracks with terror on those last 2 words. She says she can see the 9 tails through the gap under the door, writhing like smoke, and oh God, it's not a story, it's a warning, and then the wood begins to splinter. What follows lasts approximately 45 seconds. First comes the sharp crack of the door giving way, wood snapping like bones breaking. Then the wet, tearing sound. Fabric first, her clothing shredding, followed by something deeper, more visceral. The sound of flesh parting. Jolene tries to scream, but it comes out as a choked, liquid gasp, like her throat has already been opened and she's trying to breathe through blood. You can hear her body hitting the floor, a heavy thud, and then the feeding sounds begin, wet, methodical. The creature is taking its time. The recording continues for another 20 seconds, just those horrible sounds of consumption, before cutting to 10 seconds of absolute silence. Then, unending static. Well, that's where the story ends. So tell me, what do you think happened to Dr. Jolene Richter? Was she the victim of a psychotic break, her own research pushing her into a delusion she couldn't escape? Or did she prove her own thesis in the most horrifying way possible, by discovering a predator so ancient and hungry that it consumed her? Have you ever felt something watching you that shouldn't exist, something that defies rational explanation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories about ancient truths that refuse to stay buried intrigue you, don't forget to subscribe. And remember, sometimes the old stories aren't stories at all. They're warnings told by people who learned the hard way.